students, yesterday we saw regarding nutrition in heterotrophs, that is saprophytes, parasites and holozoic. Holozoic is a human being. In human being we saw how the food gets digested. It starts from the mouth. Through the esophagus the food passes to the stomach. From the stomach it passes through the small intestine. From the small intestine it passes to the large intestine, and whatever the food which is nutritive and which is needed for the body is absorbed, the unwanted food is thrown out to the anus. So this is what the nutrition yesterday we saw. So today we are going to see regarding respiration. But before that, some experiments are there. I need to explain that experiment. What are those experiments? Let us see. The first experiment, let us see what is there. You can see that here test tube is taken. In the test tube, one more tube is fixed, and in the tube a pitchkari, or you can say a syringe is fixed, and in the test tube lime water is there. In the second picture you can see test tube is there, a hollow tube is there, and lime water is there, and in the person's mouth the hollow tube is there. What we are going to check in this is that when we blow carbon dioxide into lime water which is present in a test tube, what happens? Lime water is calcium hydroxide, CaOH twice. So what happens? Calcium hydroxide. When carbon dioxide reacts with calcium hydroxide, the lime water turns milky because formation of what will take place? Calcium carbonate, which makes the lime water milky. Okay. So in both the processes, what is going to happen? Let us see the first process. With the help of the syringe, you are going to make the atmosphere from the environment to enter into this tube, and in the atmosphere we know carbon dioxide is there, and that carbon dioxide will react with the lime water and make it milky. Similarly, in the second experiment you can see the human being is blowing the air through this test tube. It reaches, that is blowing the air through a small tube, and it reaches the test tube. Inside the test tube lime water is there which will turn milky. Here what he asks is that amount of carbon dioxide we breathe out. It is a question. How much amount? That is, which will be faster? In which test tube the lime water turns milky? Now we know that in atmosphere the percentage of carbon dioxide is less compared to nitrogen. So less amount of carbon dioxide will enter from the syringe to the tube. Through the tube it goes to the lime water, and it takes long time to make lime water into milky, but carbon dioxide will react. But in the second experiment, the human being is blowing the air directly. Okay. Now we know that the plants, exchange of gases takes place for photosynthesis. It takes in carbon dioxide through the stomata and gives out oxygen. Similarly, in living beings also exchange of gases takes place. That is breathing process, where we take in oxygen and breathe out, exhale carbon dioxide from the lungs. So the carbon dioxide from the lungs is exhaled out by us when the man is blowing the air through the tube. So what happens? The percentage of carbon dioxide is more produced by our body, which comes out to from the lungs into the mouth, and it enters into the test tube containing lime water. Very fast the lime water will get converted into milky. That is, the calcium hydroxide is the lime water. It reacts with the carbon dioxide and gets converted to calcium carbonate. So it gets milky. This is what happens in the first experiment. That means breathing is very important. Breathing in, when we breathe out, the amount of carbon dioxide is more. How much we take oxygen, then what happens in the body, exchange of gases takes place. The lungs will, from all the parts of the body, the carbon dioxide is collected and it is expelled out and exhaled out. Let us see the second experiment. It also tells us that carbon dioxide turns lime water milky. But here what we are using, that is very important. What we are going to take? We are going to take a test tube. In the test tube, we are going to fill fruit juice or sugar solution, any one of them. And to that you are going to add some yeast. Yeast is what it is. Belong to a fungi family and it is a microorganism. And yeast has very important quality. It does the fermentation. What is meant by fermentation? In your house, your mummy prepares idli and dosa. In the night, she will grind the rice and urad dal, mix it together, put it in a box, close the lid of the box, and in the morning you can see the level of the mixture is raised up. So what happens? The reaction takes place inside the lid is closed. So in absence of oxygen, what happens? The reaction takes place, the chemical reaction takes place. Due to that, what happens? The fermentation takes place. Similarly, here yeast is a good fermenter. It is only used for fermentation. In bread and all, when bread is being prepared, in the dough of the bread, yeast is added. That is why that network in the small holes and that sponginess is due to the addition of the yeast in the bread, that it will do fermentation. It will produce carbon dioxide, which makes the dough to rise. That is what we are going to observe over here. In the fresh juice or sugar solution, we are going to add yeast. Then we are going to close this test tube with a single hold cork. Through that cork, we are going to pass an U-tube, such that one end of the U-tube will be in this bigger test tube having yeast and fruit juice. The second end of the U-tube will be in a test tube having lime water. As soon as the yeast starts reacting with fruit juice, so what happens? That the changes we will observe, that the yeast reacts with the fruit juice and it does a chemical reaction between yeast and fruit juice. That is, the carbon dioxide is produced, which is lighter in weight, will rise up in this test tube and comes into this test tube which contains lime water. So the lime water converts into what we call it as milky, that is, the calcium hydroxide gets converted into calcium carbonate. But here what happens? Yeast, that is, whatever the changes is taking place, yeast itself is a slow processor. It gives out carbon dioxide or reacts with fruit juice very slowly. That is why idli and dosa, what we do, in night we will keep it in the morning. So it takes a half day or 1 day for fermentation. So in the same way, yeast also, what is the changes observed and how long does it take place? So would the carbon dioxide to turn milky, it will take either 1 or half day process. It is a very slow process. Okay, what are the products of the fermentation? So when the yeast reacts with fruit juice or when the yeast reacts with sugar solution, it converts it into alcohol and carbon dioxide. That is the ethanol we call it. Further I will explain you regarding this. In industries also, yeast are used for the same purpose to prepare ethanol. But in industries, the fermentation takes place 3 to 4 days to prepare alcohol. So this is also what it is, that carbon dioxide turns lime water milky. That yeast also acts with yeast produces carbon dioxide, which reacts with the fruit juice and sugar solution, and it makes the lime water milky. So that is what the carbon dioxide is very important. That means respiration occurs even in microbes, plants, animals and human being. That is what the next topic I am going to teach you is regarding respiration. Here you can see that respiration, that is the carbon dioxide is produced, that is from the atmospheric air the carbon dioxide enters over here, and here the man is blowing the carbon dioxide. Here what is happening? The yeast which is used, it will produce the carbon dioxide after the reaction with the juice or sugar solution, and that carbon dioxide will convert the lime water into milky. So certain organisms are there which can convert, that is what is happening, the food which is absorbed by our body through transportation in nutrition, I told you, reaches each and every cell of our body, and our cell requires energy, very important. For so many activities we require energy. How do we get that energy? The glucose, that is carbohydrate in the last, is converted to glucose. This glucose should be broken down. The breakdown of the glucose releases the, what to call it as, energy, and that is the breakdown occurs when oxygen reacts with glucose, and that is how what happens. The respiration is very important. We inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. In some organized organisms, what happens? The oxygen will break down the glucose and make energy to release. But in some organism, what happens? In absence of oxygen, what happens? The glucose gets converted into pyruvate, and further pyruvate will release the energy. So oxygen is used for releasing energy, is called as aerobic respiration. In absence of oxygen, the energy is released is called as anaerobic respiration. So we are going to see in the next topic aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. We saw two experiments regarding carbon dioxide when passed through lime water makes the lime water milky. Lime water is calcium hydroxide, and calcium carbonate is formed, which is white milk in color, so the lime water turns milky. That means respiration is needed. Now we know that all living organisms requires energy. All, whether it is a small microbe or a human being, all of them require energy. For what purpose? To perform various life processes. Okay. From where do we get the energy? The nutrition will provide the energy through the food. The food which we eat. How I told yesterday, I explained regarding nutrition. It gets digested in small intestine, and all the complex form of food is converted into simple form. Means carbohydrate is converted into glucose, protein is converted into amino acid, fats is converted into fatty acids and glycerol. These are the simple form. In small intestine, I told you, finger-like projections are there, which are called villi. It is surrounded by blood capillaries. So what happens? This simple form of food exchange takes place between the walls of the villi and between the walls of the capillary. So capillary carries this simple form of food to each and every cell of the body. So, for energy production, oxygen is needed. So, in the cell, the food is stored. So, from the food to get back the energy, the oxidation of the food should take place. That will only happen when oxygen enters into the body. And when it will enter into the body, it is through respiration. So respiration is an important life process. What is meant by respiration? Respiration means what? A process in which oxygen is taken inside for the oxidation of glucose to release energy, and during the reaction whatever the carbon dioxide is provided, it is what happened, the carbon dioxide is released out of the body. That is called as respiration. Once again I am explaining regarding respiration. What is meant by respiration? A process in which oxygen is taken inside the body, so that the glucose which is in the food, which is present in the cells of the body, oxidizes to release energy, and when oxidation of the food takes place, carbon dioxide is produced, and this carbon dioxide is exchanged and it comes to the lungs, and through the lungs it is thrown out through the nose, and that is called as respiration. So came to know what is meant by respiration. Okay. Now respiration takes place in certain different ways according to the different types of organisms. There are certain steps involved in respiration. The first step in respiration is same for aerobic respiration and anaerobic. Ma'am, what is this aerobic and what is this anaerobic? It are the types of respiration. That means to break down glucose, oxygen is needed. When in presence of oxygen, when glucose is broken down and energy is released, that type of respiration is called aerobic respiration. It occurs in many organisms. But in some organisms or living beings, what happens? In absence of oxygen, the breakdown of glucose takes place. That is called as anaerobic respiration. So, occurrence of aerobic and occurrence of anaerobic respiration, the first step is same. So, what happens? The glucose, which is a 6-carbon molecule, C6, H12O6, so carbon atoms are 6. In the cytoplasm, the oxygen will enter through the cell membrane. It reaches the cytoplasm. In cytoplasm, what happens? The glucose 6 carbon gets broken or breaks down into pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon molecule, and some energy is released. Till here, for aerobic and anaerobic respiration, the step is same. The first step is same. Further, what happens? Let us see. So further, you have seen I have divided into 3 parts. Okay. But now, in presence of oxygen in mitochondria, very important in the cell mitochondria, it is an organelle you have studied in 7th and 8th. Mitochondria is called as the powerhouse of the cell. Why? Because it stores the glucose in it, and whenever it is needed, it breaks the glucose and gives the energy. So it is called as powerhouse of a cell. So, in mitochondria, the food, what happens? The food which is there reacts with the oxygen. The oxygen enters into the cell and goes into the mitochondria, And the glucose, that is a pyruvate, what 3 carbon energy, 3 carbon atom we got, that further is broken down into carbon dioxide, water and energy. That is what carbon dioxide is released out by our body, that is respiration. So energy is given, and for whatever life process we need the energy, we get the energy. That is living organisms in presence of oxygen in mitochondria, they break glucose into carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released. This type of whatever reaction takes place, it is due to aerobic respiration. So this is called as aerobic respiration. In absence of oxygen, example I gave you, yeast in second experiment I explained you. It does not require oxygen to break down the glucose to get energy. In absence of oxygen in yeast, what happens? The pyruvate, which is 3 carbon molecule, gets converted into ethanol. I told you alcohol, ethanol is prepared by yeast. So in industry, to prepare ethanol, yeast is used. So ethanol, which is a 2 carbon molecule, along with that carbon dioxide is also produced and energy is also produced. And this type of whatever the reaction takes place in absence of oxygen, it is called as anaerobic respiration. In muscle cells, all the living organisms mostly have the muscles, and in the muscle cells, what happens? In lack of oxygen, that is another type of what you call as anaerobic respiration happens in particular in muscle cells. So what happens in muscle cells? The pyruvate, that is 3 carbon molecule, in lack, when the oxygen is not supplied to the muscle cells, due to the lack of supply of oxygen, what happens? The pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid, which is 3 carbon molecule and energy. But this lactic acid formation is very, very dangerous for in the muscle cells because it creates cramps. So the muscle cramps is due to that particular muscle cell is not getting the supply of oxygen. So lack of oxygen is there. So due to that, the pyruvate breaks into lactic acid and energy. But that energy is not useful. It is creating cramps, that energy in the muscle cells. So that is what the one more type of what you call it as a breakdown of glucose takes place in our body. Let us once again revise what are the what is meant by respiration and what are the different steps involved in respiration. All the living organisms, from microbes to human beings, whether they are small or whether they are big, all of them require energy. I require energy for what purpose? I require energy for so many purposes. While sitting, walking, okay, then washing utensils, washing clothes. For all that what I need what you call it as energy. So for various life processes in our body, also metabolism taking place, the digestive system is working, the excretory system is working, the respiration is taking place, okay, then the transportation is taking place. For to do all these activities, energy is required. And to get that energy, from where do we get? The nutrition, the food which is digested in the small intestine. In the small intestine, villi are there. We are on nearby the villi, capillaries are there. So the carbohydrate is converted into glucose, which is absorbable by the blood. Proteins is converted to amino acids, which is a simple form, it is also absorbed by the blood. Fat is converted into fatty acid and glycerol, which is also absorbed by the blood. The blood absorbs that simple form of food and makes it to reach to each and every part of our cell in the body is made up of so many cells. So each and every cell of our body, and in that cell, what happens? The oxygen which also reaches that cell will break the glucose, and due to that energy is produced. So oxygen is required. How will the oxygen enter into our body or enter into the living beings? Unless and until respiration is not done, the oxygen cannot reach. So respiration is an important life process. What is meant by respiration? Respiration is nothing but intake of the oxygen from the atmosphere. We take the air. In that air, oxygen is there. That oxygen enters into our lungs. And in the lungs, what happens? Exchange takes place. And the oxygen which is needed for the breakdown of glucose will reach the cell. Breakdown of glucose takes place. The oxygen is used, carbon dioxide is produced, that carbon dioxide comes to our lungs, and through the lungs we release it. That is called as respiration. Certain steps are involved in respiration, but mainly respiration is divided into two types: aerobic respiration and anaerobic. What is meant by aerobic respiration? In presence of oxygen, the glucose releases the energy due to oxidation, is called aerobic. In many organisms, aerobic respiration takes place. What is meant by anaerobic respiration? In absence of oxygen, glucose gets broken up and it releases the energy. That is called as anaerobic. But what are the steps involved? The common step involved for aerobic and anaerobic respiration is same. The 6-carbon molecule glucose in cytoplasm, the oxygen is taken by the cell. So in cytoplasm, the site for glucose to react and convert into pyruvate is the cytoplasm. So the glucose is converted at a 6-carbon molecule gets converted into 3-carbon molecule, and little energy is released. This pyruvate, according to the presence of oxygen, absence of oxygen, the steps are different. In aerobic respiration, that is in presence of oxygen, this takes place in mitochondria. Why? Because mitochondria is a powerhouse which will give the energy whenever our body requires. So what happens? The food is stored in the mitochondria. When the oxygen enters into the mitochondria, the oxidation of glucose, that is pyruvate, and first the glucose gets converted into pyruvate, and further the pyruvate reacts with the oxygen and it gets converted into carbon dioxide, water and energy. This carbon dioxide which is produced is released, and that is what the respiration is. In yeast and some other types of microorganism, in absence of oxygen, what happens? The glucose is broken down. That is, the pyruvate 3-carbon molecule further gets converted into ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy in absence of oxygen, and that is anaerobic respiration. In our muscle cells, sometimes due to the lack of oxygen, the oxygen may not reach in muscle cell. At that time, anaerobic respiration condition occurs in the muscle cell. So what happens? The pyruvate 3-carbon molecule gets converted into lactic acid and energy is released. This lactic acid is very, very dangerous. It creates cramps in the muscle cell. So that is what is regarding the respiration. Previously I explained you how are the different steps involved in oxidizing glucose into energy, so that energy is utilized for different life processes. That is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Now I am going to show you how aerobic and anaerobic respirations are different from each other. That is, how it is different in terms of oxygen, how it is different in terms of oxidation of glucose, how it is different in terms of reactants of respiration, how it is different in terms of products of respiration, and how it is different in terms of amount of ATP. These 5 points, how aerobic and anaerobic differs from each other. Let us see the first point, oxygen. That means in presence of oxygen, the glucose, I told you no, glucose 6 carbon molecule gets converted into pyruvate 3 carbon molecule with energy. This 3 carbon molecule further in presence of oxygen, it gets in presence of oxygen, whatever the reduction takes place, that is aerobic respiration. Means oxygen is present in aerobic respiration. It is a must in aerobic respiration. In anaerobic respiration, we saw that in absence of oxygen, the pyruvate gets, what happened? It gets converted into energy. So there is oxygen is not there, or sometimes the short supply of oxygen, muscle cells, I told you, lack of oxygen for few more minutes, the oxygen is not supplied to muscle cells, that is due to short supply. What happens? The glucose is converted into energy, and that type of step is called as anaerobic respiration. Oxidation of glucose. So when oxygen is reacting with pyruvate, when oxygen oxidizes the pyruvate, complete oxidation of glucose takes place. That is 100% of glucose you will take, you will get 100% of energy. Full energy is got in the oxidation of glucose in aerobic respiration. That is, oxygen completely oxidizes glucose. But in anaerobic respiration, oxygen is not there. In absence of oxygen, the glucose will never oxidize completely. It will oxidize, what you call it as incomplete oxidation. So fully the energy is not obtained in anaerobic respiration. That is the oxidation of glucose. For that, aerobic complete oxidation, in anaerobic incomplete oxidation. Reactants of respiration, that when you take in oxygen and when you breathe out carbon dioxide, when oxygen enters into our body, the oxidation of glucose takes place, and what happens? Oxygen is what you call it as byproduct is given out. This glucose and oxygen are that is what happens. Glucose, I told you, in any chemical reaction, reactants are required, then only the products are given. So in aerobic respiration, the reactants are glucose and oxygen. In anaerobic respiration, only glucose, because oxygen is absent. So complete oxidation of glucose does not take place. Products of respiration, that I told you, after reactant what will become product. So in aerobic respiration, due to complete oxidation, the glucose and oxygen reacts to produce carbon dioxide and water. Here, as the glucose does not get completely oxidized, it gives out the product. The products are ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. In short supply of oxygen, that I gave you the example of muscle cells, what happens? The products of respiration are the glucose, in absence of oxygen, gets converted into lactic acid and energy. How energy is produced? In which respiration? The amount of ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy. So in comparing the amount of ATP, you can say that in aerobic, due to complete oxidation, large amount of energy is produced, and here only very less amount of glucose is oxidized, so smaller amount of ATP is produced. So this is the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So today I am going to complete here. Tomorrow we will see respiration in terrestrial animals, that is with the help of respiratory system. Thank you children. Bye children.